Hello, today I'll be ranking the P.O.D albums. I won't be talking about any EPs or live stuff or compilations or anything like that. I'll just be focusing on the main studio albums. But yeah, I'm going to be seeing Korn, Evanescence, and P.O.D live next week, and definitely really looking forward to that. And I figured with that excitement, I figured why not go ahead and rank the P.O.D albums. I have ranked the Korn albums on my channel. I did a video for that, so if you haven't seen that video, definitely check it out after this video if you're interested, if you're a Korn fan. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go ahead and go from worst to best. So at the bottom, I'm going to have to go with Brown. So overall, a decent album, but my biggest issue with this album is, well, at least in my opinion, there's just a lot of filler, a lot of skippable songs, but there's some pretty good stuff on here though, like Know Me, Sulla, Preach, which I think is kind of an underrated song, and then Full Color, which if I remember correctly is the longest song on here, and but still one of my favorites. Yeah, this album for me doesn't have the strongest replay value, and again, for me, I think this album could have benefited from some trimming, but again, overall, a decent album from P.O.D. But next we're going to go ahead and move on to their debut album, Snuff The Punk. Now I can understand why some people might like Brown more than this album. I mean, Brown, I guess you could say, sounds a bit, I don't know, cleaner maybe, however you want to put it in terms of the production, but I like the rawness of this album personally. This album is raw, heavy, and it kind of has a dark sound to it, which I really like. Now, with saying that, I would definitely wouldn't rank it as one of their best, but there's some pretty good stuff on here. Some stuff that I think is kind of overlooked or underrated, such as the song Draw the Line. Hands down one of their most underrated songs in my opinion. Pretty catchy song. Same with Every Knee, which is maybe one of their heaviest songs. I really like that one also. But yeah, I think the album starts off fairly strong with the first three tracks, Coming Back, Let the Music Do the Talking, and Draw the Line. And now you get towards the middle of the album where things can get maybe a little hit or miss, but I do enjoy Get It Right, especially the riffs. But the title track is another favorite of mine on here, and Run is also another solid track. But overall, a good album. Again, not one of the best, but I think there's some stuff that's worth checking out on here, especially if you haven't heard it. And if you somehow haven't heard it, I definitely say check out Draw the Line and Every Knee and the title track. Now to the next album in my ranking, we're going to go ahead and move to their concept album, The Awakening. Now when this album came out, I liked it but didn't love it, and I pretty much feel the same way now. I mean, this is another album in their discography for me that just doesn't have the strongest replay value, but there's still some killer songs on here like Am I Awake and Rise of NWO. This Goes Out to You, Speed Demon. Those are probably my favorites on the album, but yeah, a decent album from P.O.D, but I wouldn't rank it as one of their strongest. But then we move on to their latest album, Circles. Now, kind of like with the Awakening, when this album came out, I liked it but didn't love it, but I did like this album a little bit more. Some of my favorites on here, Panic Attack, On the Radio, Listening for the Silence, Soundboy Killa. There's some pretty good stuff on here, but I'll admit there are a few skippable songs, but overall, a good album from P.O.D. And next, we're going to go ahead and move on to When Angels and Serpents Dance. Now, this album and Circles honestly kind of go back and forth for me in the ranking, but this album, if I had to guess, there's probably more songs that I enjoy off this album than Circles. But I think the highs on this album are more impressive than the highs on Circles, but of course that's just my opinion. Some of my favorites on this album, Addicted, Shine With Me, Condescending, the title track, I really like the title track. The End of the World, another solid track. I'll Be Ready is a song that's grown on me over time. It features the Marley Girls, who I'm not familiar with, but I do like their contribution to the song. I do like the vocals, or their vocals, but overall, a solid album from P.O.D. Not one of their best, but there's some pretty good stuff on here, I'd say. So next we got Murdered Love. This album, in my opinion, is a pretty fun listen, and some of the riffs on here I think can get pretty heavy. Eyes, another heavy banger on here. I really like that one. I think it opens up the album fairly well. The first 4 songs I think are really good. Murdered Love, the title track, also really good. Lost in Forever, a solid anthem for P.O.D. I really like that one. Definitely one of my favorites on here. You do have the controversial song, I Am, because you have the use of the F word. But I like that song. Not one of my favorites on the album, but I do like it though. Beautiful, which you could maybe say is kind of the ballad on here. And overall, I like that song. Yeah, again, overall, this album is a pretty fun listen. Now, there is a bonus track on the deluxe edition that I think is hands down one of their most underrated songs, Burn It Down. If you somehow haven't heard that song, please check it out. Burn It Down, really good song. But yeah, overall, pretty good album from P.O.D, I'd say. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to something that I think might be a bit controversial, but the next album in my ranking is the Selftitled. Now might be the part of the video where people might click off, but I don't know. I personally really enjoyed this album. Now this was one of the first P.O.D albums that I heard. It was either it might have been the 3rd album I heard. I can't remember, but I don't know what it is about this album, but I personally really dig it. Now, Murdered Love and this album do go back and forth in my ranking sometimes, but I don't know. Again, I really dig this album. Now, when this album came out, they got fairly mixed reviews. Of course, with this album, you got No Marcus, you have Jason Truby, and his guitar playing is fairly different from Marcus, and I didn't have a problem with Jason in the band. I think he would do better with the next album, but I did like his playing on here still. Some of my favorites, Will You, Change the World probably being my favorite of the singles and one of my favorites also on the album. Then you got the song Freedom Fighters, which I think is probably one of the most underrated songs. I really like that song a lot. Identify is really good. Waiting on Today, Revolution. Now you also have the instrumental at the end, Eternal, which is fairly different for P.O.D, but still overall a solid instrumental. But yeah, fairly divisive album in their discography, but for me, I personally really dig it. But next we move on to Testify, the second album with Jason, and also his last. And this album definitely sounds a bit closer to Satellite and Southtown compared to the previous album, the Selftitled. This album is not as dark as the Selftitled, and this album, I guess you could say, sounds closer to their roots. But some of my favorites on here, Roots in Stereo, which is maybe one of my favorite P.O.D songs. Goodbye for Now has really strong melody to it, probably one of my favorite P.O.D songs also. But I think this album has really good deep cuts, like Sounds Like War and Teachers. Those 2 songs I really like a lot. They're growing to be maybe some of my favorite P.O.D songs. Lights Out, which was another single on here, also had a music video. That's another pretty good song on here. You have the song On the Grind, which focuses more on their hip-hop side. I really like that one, but overall, pretty good album from P.O.D. Definitely one of their best, I'd say. But next, we're going to go ahead and move to their most commercially successful album, Satellite. Now, when I first got into P.O.D, this was my favorite, but as time has gone on, things have changed. But I still think this is easily one of their best, and I'm sure every P.O.D fan would probably agree with me on that. Easily one of their best, but some of my favorites, Set It Off. The first 4 tracks are definitely some of the best on here. I mean, you got the hits, Alive, Youth of the Nation, and Boom. But the title track is maybe my favorite of the singles. Maybe, I don't know. I really like that song a lot. I think it's definitely one of their best Tracks. Ridiculous, which is more reggae focused. I really like that song. You have Without Ja, Nothing featuring HR. Maybe one of their most underrated songs. I really like the heavy guitar at the start of the song. Portrait's another heavy banger on the album. I really like that one. But yeah, definitely one of P.O.D's best, easily. Really good album from the band. Now we're going to go ahead and move to what I think is their best, the Fundamental Elements of Southtown. So again, as I mentioned earlier, Satellite started off as my favorite, but this album nowadays is now my favorite. I mean, you got a lot of bangers on here. This album is just full of hooks and just really ear candy heavy guitar that I really enjoy. And this album is just a fun listen, and sure, it's more on the lengthy side. You got 16 tracks, but I mean, I think this album has pretty good deep cuts and some songs I think are kind of overlooked, especially towards the end of the album. Tribal, Freestyle, and Outcast are 3 songs that I think are, again, really underrated and really overlooked. And especially Outcast, which is maybe one of their heaviest songs. I really like that song a lot. Definitely a great way to close off the album. Now you do have the big song on here, Southtown, which is of course one of their best songs. Rock the Party Off the Hook is a fairly catchy song, definitely one of the catchiest songs on here. You have Set Your Eyes to Zion, which is a little bit different from the rest of the album, but still really good, another highlight off the album. And I also like their cover of Bullet the Blue Sky, of course originally done by U2, and I'll go ahead and admit it, I'm not a big U2 fan. Now I wouldn't say that they're horrible or terrible or anything. I just think they're maybe a tad overrated, and especially overplayed, but of course that's just my opinion. But of course there are worse bands out there. But yeah, I do like that cover. But yeah, really good album from P.O.D. Definitely my favorite. But yeah, that's my ranking of the P.O.D. albums. Now before I go ahead and close off this video, I want to go ahead and show you the other P.O.D. CDs I got, because I figured, hey, why not? I do have their live CD right here. I also got the Warriors EP, which took a little while for me to find for a decent price, but I'm glad I finally got it. I also got this limited edition bonus CD, which came out around the Fundamental Elements of Southtown era. I also got the Warriors EP Volume 2. And I also got their compilation, P.O.D. Greatest Hits, the Atlantic Years, and I also have the So-Called Sessions. But yeah, anyways, let me know your thoughts on my ranking. Do you agree or disagree with some of my placements? Let me know some of your favorite or least favorite songs or albums from the band and all that good stuff. But anyways, thanks for watching. Please leave your comments and a like, subscribe. Have a nice day, and take care.